Hello. Today's guest is Dave Milner. Everyone knows Dave Milner as someone who is the editor of The Shot. He helped to provide some serious relief for many of us during the pandemic season. As we were locked in our rooms, Dave explored the frustration, and it's since turned bleaker, I suppose, from pandemic, bushfires and floods to the war and conflict that we're seeing all over the earth today. Dave has a heartfelt and honest approach to his writing, which has helped him capture and convey some of the feelings that are facing every one of us every day. So with no further ado, please welcome Dave Milner. Welcome to the program, Dave Milner. How you doing, mate?
Do you want the small talk answer or do we I'm doing okay, man. It's a loaded question nowadays. How are you, Joe?
I think I'm in the same boat. We might potentially get to that space where we kind of allude a little bit to what that might be at some point in this conversation. But thank you so much for being here. And it's been a explosive time in many of our lives. And I suppose I wanted to start off just sort of asking you a little bit about how you're seeing this protest on Sunday, which I just think was something we haven't seen since the Iraq War, really, like a gathering like that. And yeah, I know you've been following the protests and going to a lot of the protests, and I would like to just, firstly ask you what you thought of it.
I mean, it's so complicated. My thoughts, like, unlike the situation over in the Middle East, my thoughts are complicated because it's a beautiful moment. There is solidarity and love. All of that's in play and it's important. And the other thing that no one really talks about in the mainstream press is there is an implied threat when you get that many people together. It is letting the establishment and the government know that there are more of us than there are of them. And to the degree that that message is coming across, Chris Minns looks a little like he's shocked at the reaction, like he really miscalculated that one. Anthony Albanese got on the phone to Benjamin Netanyahu, but this is where you know, the realist and the guy that's really pissed off and has been pissed off for 2 years kicks in. So fucking what? You know? So fucking what? Because you can't eat phone calls from Anthony Albanese. And we're getting to a really desperate situation right now. And we're going to need a whole lot more of this sort of thing, basically. This isn't, I don't want anyone to feel like this is a victory lap, is what I'm saying.
So you feel like, the weight of people, I didn't know the bridge could hold that many people on it. And yeah, looking at upwards towards 300,000 have been reported. This is, a definite message. And, the crowd was like a real motley crew as well. Like it wasn't your sort of your average low ball protest crowd. It was a mixed bag there. And I even saw, libertarian candidates in the crowd supporting the ceasefire, along next to long-standing writers and advocates and things like that. So, do you think this is the moment where it kind of really became, a mainstream, issue amongst the public?
I'm Again, it's hard to say because I've just been buried in it for 2 years. And for me, it's been all consuming. It's been the only thing I've been able to think about for 2 years. So I can't really put myself in the mainstream thought processes anymore. I'm very removed from that. But there's definitely a narrative shift in that the types of things that people are saying in public, in politics and media are much more. Do you know what, Joel? It still isn't far enough. It really, really still isn't far enough to say that France is going to acknowledge the Palestinian state in September after everybody's already starved to death. It's more Western bullshit, is what I feel. So I am heartened by the show of humanity, but I have been for 2 years now. I've been going to all these protests, and for a very long time, they've not just been students and Palestinians, they've been nurses and doctors and teachers and independent journalists, and they just have been for quite a long time. It's getting harder and harder for the political class to acknowledge this, and this is why we're seeing some face saving, but I do cynically think it is face saving at this point.
It is so top heavy, and the influence, which is obviously very deep and very profoundly scary to even consider, is still there and is still motivating the mainstream political class to kind of go about this course. There has to be a certain point now. I mean, you just mentioned France and, Canada, the UK, even Germany have made these more incremental pushes towards some form of like actionable process, even though, as you say, it's too little too late. And it's just like another like sleight of hand scenario where they pull out another little trick to distract people as the genocide and the ethnic cleansing is reaching its peak. um
Exactly. The thing about this phase of the genocide now is that skeletal children aren't, you can't pass that off as an oopsie in the same way that you can a collapsed building. It's very obviously engineered. And that's why it's becoming awkward for these psychopaths.
it's so interesting that though, right? Like, because I saw that Matthew Doran report where he's up in the plane, and I had a bit of a reach that report where he was a bit heartfelt in that in his report, saying he's not allowed to film out of the plane window, that Israel have banned filming over Gaza because if they see the rubble below, it's going to be a big issue for PR. um and then
So don't go in the fucking plane. That's my attitude.
but the whole thing is like the Jordanians sort of showed it like yesterday or the day before, some Jordanian journalists, and it's kind of like, yeah, all right, so now we've seen it with like legacy lenses on a camera, and now like Bob Geldof's talking about it, but it's kind of like, what the hell is going on in this digital age where we've been seeing these kind of like feeds where we've seen better footage of the aerial destruction of Gaza from within Gaza, and yeah, it's been left till now where it's like legacy, it's an official thing, and these checks and balances and processes can be put in place that are very slow, very meandering, and don't do anything to stop the slaughter and the carnage. Yeah, how does that work? And when does the legacy media, do you think, start to buy into this and start like prosecuting the genocide?
Well, I think they're probably going to find themselves prosecuted as part of the unraveling of the genocide eventually. So I'm not sure it's particularly in their interest. There has been some horrific reporting. I've focused quite heavily on the ABC this time around instead of Murdoch, just because I guess because we expect better. And getting up every Sunday morning and watching David Spears and Patricia Karvelis and their ilk say Israel has a right to defend itself, the Hamas-run health ministry, all of this, you know, unmitigated nonsense that over and over again for 2 years, and now all of a sudden this idea that now we're getting a clearer picture of what's happening over there, while their audiences that have Instagram accounts have been watching this unfiltered into their souls for 2 years now. I don't know how they go to work every day and keep the pretense up. I find it insulting.
It's a tough one because like you speak to people that are adjacent to legacy media, and through camaraderie and oh, that guy's a good bloke and all that sort of stuff, there's this sympathy or like leeway given to
Mm.
the mainstream press. Oh, they've got a hard run and they've got to please everything, and the ABC, they get targeted by so many interests, and they've got to really stay between some narrow lines and all that sort of stuff. But you see, like, even the way that they reported on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, it was all kind of like a perilous situation. He said something about like a perilous situation. They focused on the police. They
Yeah, the cops
focused
were
on the,
terrified of all the prams and scarves.
and it's incredible. Like there were probably 10, 15 ABC, let alone legacy media, articles written about this, and they all seem to be kind of in that negative. They don't capture the actual enormity of this turnout. And after the culmination of the build up of weekly protests for 2 fucking years, like it's kind of insane. So I mean, what do you think is like, if Matthew Doran is sympathetic to the plight of the Gazan people and he's limited by editorial, for example,
Mm.
where's this limitation? I've spoken about this with a few guests now, but like, where do you think this limitation's coming from? I mean, we know there's an executive remit, but how do you think it works?
It works in a whole bunch of overlapping ways, is the answer to that question. Partly it is self-selecting. You do not end up the editor of a daily newspaper in Melbourne or Sydney if you do not hold these views. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that we are all, I mean, did you look at Francesca Albanese's report, the most recent one, about how complicit our largest corporations are in the genocide in Gaza? This is the other reason. It goes to the core of capitalism, essentially, and that it's a different argument for the ABC, but for the private companies, lots of them are going to make money out of war, and they're going to make money out of slaughter, and they're going to make money out of pilfering the Middle East for resources. This is imperial capitalism's basic equation, and America has been running it for decades now, that periodically they go into Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and they convert brown bodies into cash for their war machine. And this is part of it, and those corporations are part of the messy web that Australian media is a part of, and ultimately they have imperial interests as well. And then the other thing, the third layer of it, is just blatant, normalized racism. We have shitloads of that in Australian media. So that's a messy web. And then you just get a bunch of dumbasses that don't know what they're talking about saying Israel has a right to defend itself over and over again.
You say dumbasses, that's a real good one. I mean, there seems to be a lack of depth to a lot of these people. There, the meritocracy seems to be gone. And yeah, we're starting to see people that are willing to fight propaganda, chosen over people that are objective journalists. The exodus of those objective journalists and like the loss of that tradecraft and that skill has been there for decades now. I mean, they've been running like rats from a burning ship, these good quality journalists, for a long time. And now we are stuck with this like soup of like willing automatons that are working towards a basic kind of end game from above. What that end game is, I'd like to like discuss with you. What are the objectives of the legacy media here, like, and what's their end game? Is it just total support for Israel's dominance of the Middle East, or is there some kind of turning point here?
I mean, we're all looking for the turning point and the hope. I always perpetually hope so. Rebellions are built on hope. But, like I said, I'm a Star Wars nerd. Rupert Murdoch has interests in military companies in the Middle East. It's not discussed very often. Grace Tame talks about this. People should listen to her a little bit more often about this sort of stuff too. I mean, survival is largely the goal for legacy media. People are just looking out for themselves at this point. Truth isn't the goal, that's for damn sure. But what the end game is, I think everyone's just flashing. I don't know, Joel. They're like, I couldn't put myself into that headspace. I've deliberately removed myself on it because to do that sort of thing, I don't know, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. I'd feel like a fucking psychopath. So it's really difficult for me to say. I don't personally, the people that work in those systems, I don't really think it's necessarily about the individuals. They can do whatever the fuck they want. But these systems are the things that are toxic, that are perpetuating this bullshit that allows atrocities like the genocide of Palestine to happen. It really does grease the wheels for these sorts of imperial atrocities. And I think implicitly people know who their masters are when it comes to their corporate media. That's why they have those jobs. That's why I don't have those jobs. That's why you don't have those jobs.
70% of those jobs are in that Murdoch sphere that you speak about. And, the Murdoch media empire has been like a spear of the Anglosphere for half a century at least. And like, the objectives of this kind of like late stage, imperial push by, via Washington and Tel Aviv, is kind of has been fostered, and the true believer is Murdoch. I mean, I know somewhere that Murdoch's like maybe the second or third biggest donor to Netanyahu, and his political campaigns. So yeah, like it's kind of just an interesting one how they're trying to push for this dominance, this medieval style dominance in Israel that's being shown on like TikTok and involving genocides of people in 2025. It's just such a fucking contrast, and it breaks your mind a little bit, right?
It does, man. Like it's it's an anachronistic project, Israel. It is something that feels like it should be from 250 years ago when Europeans were doing the same thing in Australia. Like at a certain point, there is this global consciousness. It's very easy to have Muslim mates on the other side of the world that we can reach instantly. This idea that we're constantly pitted against each other for nonsensical reasons, for narrative reasons and for resource wars. I don't know. I think lots of people are over it.
These ideological things I was speaking to, they coalesce with what exactly you're speaking with, which is these like cold, mechanical corporate aims, which at the end of empire are the most disgusting and rapacious and like devastating to human life techniques of amassing wealth that there is. It's not like the 50s where they were making washing machines and fucking, you know what I mean? Like, they were putting together these multifaceted economies where everyone was getting rich in all these different monopolies. Oh, and
We are very much not in that stage of capitalism anymore. People my age and below no longer believe that they're going to have a stable financial future. They're not going to be able to pass on wealth to their kids. Middle class is completely hollowed out, and state wealth and working class wealth has been siphoned up by the establishment, by the ultra wealthy, by the types of people that perpetuate things like the genocide of Palestine. I suppose it's a failure of the left that we haven't been able to convince enough people that all of this is linked and that we should give a shit about this. Like I think back to, it's interesting. I was thinking back to my political awakening as a ragey teenager. And part of it was I really wanted a pair of Nikes one day. And I bought some from the South Melbourne market for like $80. And then they kind of they fell apart a week or so later. And in the research that I did at the time on the earliest version of the internet, found out that kids my age were making them in Indonesia for 3 cents an hour, and, went down that rabbit hole all of a sudden. And then here we are 20 odd years later. And I just feel more affirmed in my belief for being pissed off about that 20 years ago, because, we have Nike today dropping Grace Tame for saying humane things about the Palestinians. So this is this murky web of capitalism leading to perpetual genocide, not just in Palestine, but in Congo and Sudan as well. It's veiled from the general public. This is not included in the official narrative. We get told that, the red t-shirt guys are going to save you from anything horrible. Blue t-shirt guys, they'll keep your businesses safe. And like that's the limitation of the thought that is encouraged within Australia.
Well, neoliberalism is, controlled via Washington, I suppose, and as it's been in decline, yeah, all these things. It's very interesting, this topic. Like all these things that you say, like it's not just the wars that have become more depraved and more unreasonable and more crazy. It's also systems of capital and the way we, look at finances, the way we live from hand to mouth in the digital age. It's just kind of like. And yeah, it has conditioned us. Like it once made us complicit, I think, where we were like, oh, we're living in this cool, kind of 90s neoliberal paradise, and it makes us complicit in all the shit that happens outside of those borders, right? But now everyone's kind of like choking and starting to look up and going, well, where's the help? It's all over there in this war zone, or it's all, our government's focused on appeasing this tiny little lobbying block in Canberra over building housing for this sort of desperate population. And yeah, like the veil gets torn off. And yeah, you no longer feel as complicit anymore. You feel more like a prisoner. Yeah, I think we're seeing a big change in society where potentially that protest on the weekend, exemplified that rage that's bubbling up in the Australian population, like that disconnect between the political class and the people, which is just starker than it's ever been in the modern era.
I think so. I think we're hitting multiple overlapping crisis points that rhetoric without any sort of tangible felt solution is nowhere near good enough anymore. And I think the Labor Party's miscalculating slightly. It's a strange thing to say given they have like a 51 uni party lead on the parliament, basically. But you're right, there is definitely a discontent. You see it in America. You see it absolutely in the not the Democrats, but the actual left in America, they're all ready to punch on with ICE agents, basically. Like, the temperature is rising.
Look, America, we are hitched to them in so many ways. And like, as much as we give them shit, there's so much more kind of bubbling below the surface. People are much more aware of their rights. They have a Bill of Rights to begin with, which we don't have. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, there is like more of a room for these little cauldrons of ideas to take off in the United States, it seems. Whereas Australia, the duopoly has held us in step. And I'd like to think, yeah, going back to the protests and going back to the shift. I mean, I heard it went from 75% of Australians supported Netanyahu's actions on the day of October 7, in response. And now it's only 14% support Israel in Australia. And yeah, like John Howard, when we did that Iraq war protest back in 2003, John Howard was in the process of kind of like putting us to sleep. And it's like it's been 20 years since that protest. And I think in the years between, Australia's been a real kind of conservative minded, I call it an ideological terra nullius, where we kind of just lacked this ability to like form some kind of like mongrel in us or something. And yeah, that's manifested to us being kind of like pretty ordinary today politically. And Labor gets this Chifley mandate, but it's like the most weirdest feel, isn't it? It's the weirdest like majority.
I find Australia slightly sort of disconnected from itself, amnesiac, cognitively dissonant in some really confronting ways when you clock it. And I agree entirely. I also think the way we perceive the Labor Party in this country seems to have about a 50-year lag factor on it. We have not caught up with who they are and what they are about, because they are telling us loud and clear that they are all about selling non-lethal fighter jet parts to Israel for its non-lethal genocide. Like, that's telling us who they are, you
Tell,
know?
can you please tell us? You just wrote a cracker of an article speaking
So,
about these non-lethal F-35 parts. So I was wondering if you could maybe run us through it a little bit and give us a bit of a rundown.
well, it wasn't my turn to write anything, but Penny Wong got up in Parliament as it resumed this year and tried to. I don't, you know what? I don't even know what she was trying to do. Again, I can't think like an establishment ghoul, because that's what this is. This is ghoulish stuff. She said that Australia is tied up in the F-35 supply chain with Israel, but it only sells non-lethal parts, such as the mechanism that opens the bomb bay door. That's non-lethal apparently. And these F-35s, I guess I made the very, very intelligent point that they don't do anything else at all. They just bomb the shit out of places, so that if you had a cup holder in there or some fluffy dice, they'd still be lethal parts. I don't buy, I'm going to do Scott Morrison. I don't buy a premise at all. I think it's utter nonsense. And if you're, as a representative of a nation, saying that sort of thing in Parliament in the face of a live stream genocide, my God, you must be feeling some impunity. I don't know how that would escape an advisor's silencing. That just seems absurd to me. And, you know, I guess this has really affected lots of us, but it's absolutely affected me. And I do want to see justice served. I'm not going to deny that. I think we've been horrific and complicit, and it's made me think. It's made me reconceptualize not only this country, but humanity. Like, if you haven't gone on a few existential crises the last few years, then what's wrong with you?
I actually feel exactly the same way. Uh, I'll probably, yeah, good time to speak about this now. Really, like, you and I have both been writing a lot about this movement of humanity, this dark movement. And I'd like to ask you, you're writing a lot in this space. There's a lot of frustration that you're seeing at these protests. You're speaking to people, from that are directly affected by the genocide. So, how are you managing, yourself writing for so long? I mean, yeah, how's it working out for you?
I'm uncomfortable talking about how I feel because, It's there's people that are starving right now. But I'll talk about it because I suppose it's probably how lots of people are feeling. It's fucking awful, man. I've gone to work 50 hours every week for the last 2 years and just had to look at dead children. It's fucking atrocious and it fills me with grief and rage. I need to scream in the shower every now and then. I need to cry when I write about it. Um, but it's like, what else am I gonna do? Cover it up? You know, ignore it? Fuck that. So we've just got a community. I've found so much strength in other people that feel the way I feel. Like that's a key part of it. And a lot of that's been going to the protests and finding those people and, talking to people like yourself that have also, put themselves, like, opened themselves up to atrocity and depravity and the worst things that happen. Um, yeah, yeah, it fucking sucks, dude. Like, I don't sugarcoat things. It's an awful thing to need to write about, but like all of it should be. That's the thing.
It's like it's difficult over the other side of the world, which our political class likes to remind us is a great reason why we don't have to do anything about this. And as you said, with so much like direct, just like depraved suffering happening to children, and innocents every day, the duress or the PTSD that you feel as a writer just pales in comparison. But there is something like psychological duress that I feel definitely, and I know many are feeling that, are just seeing it on Twitter every day. You don't have to be writing about it, you just have to sort of feel that helplessness. And as an
It's a
Australian,
moral injury. It's a moral injury to see something so unjust happen and not being able to stop it. Like that should hurt you. That should break your heart. There's nothing unusual about that reaction, I think, you know?
and it's tough to hear the both sides argument at a time like this right now, or just to see it covered with any kind of like leeway to quote the IDF in a story, or to sort of have some kind of like release the hostages angle. And yeah, like one thing I've noticed from this, because this is the first live stream genocide, as you've said, and you think about genocides that have happened in the past, and my previous guests remarked that no modern society has survived after committing genocide. It just eats away, and you sort of see it. It's massive domestic violence rises in Israel. There's huge PTSD, suicide rates. There's an aimless like craze going through these people, right? And you think about like that biological, like I'm thinking about a biological kind of aspect here that I never thought about before, because I think every species is abhorred by mass death of its own species. And there's a biological like imperative to want to stop that from happening. It's not just a moral or a political thing. Like, do you agree with that?
No, I'm sure there is something in that. I'm sure tribalism and propaganda gets in the way of that instinct, but there is unequivocally something there. I mean, you see, the way Israeli society has been structured for a number of decades now has basically been at the service of the genocidal project. They conditioning people to feel like they are surrounded, like they are besieged, like they are perpetually at threat, like they are just in their conquest, all of these things. And so the entire society is geared around that way. And then, you're getting 18-year-olds that go into Gaza, do horrific things, come back and realize some of what they've been told is bullshit, and then they collapse. And there's very high suicide rates in the IDF now, ridiculous mental health problems. But we acknowledge the truth of these situations and the complexity, but it's not to create any sort of sympathy for the IDF because you want better mental health, drink more water, go for a walk, and kill fewer kids. Like,
Totally. I was, more talking about the depraved nature of like conducting something like that, and how it can just destroy a society from within. You know,
It can't
Israeli
not.
society, yeah, is not functioning anymore like a normal society, and it hasn't been for a long time. I mean, even its economy and a whole bunch of things that it needs to be normal are shut down. And meanwhile, what it's the effects of what it's doing in Gaza are just unsustainable. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. I just don't think you can prolonged, sustained kill people for unlimited amounts of time. It just feels like this can't go on forever. You can't just keep doing this to people in a world of humans. Because you know the majority of humans at the moment, it's there's only 14% of people left in this country that still think Israel have skin in this game, and there's a lot different to where it was before. And yeah, maybe images of starving kids is what it takes, but yeah, hopefully the shift is starting to happen now, right?
I mean, I do hope so. We keep coming back to this fame. We do, because we're just clinging on because it's been atrocious. I mean, it's been atrocious for 78 years now for the Palestinians. This is one of the things. So that's why I'm hesitant to say this is going to change. But there are a few things that are interesting. I mean, you touched on the libertarians and like some really nutty fringe right groups turning on Israel, and that is happening in America. Marjorie Taylor Greene has called this a genocide before Anthony Albanese has called it a genocide. So all those centrists holding some high moral ground at the moment, let that go. Yeah. Um, the thing about the libertarian slash far right push against Israel, though, is that it's not really for humanitarian reasons. It's this is a waste of money reasons. It's Fortress America reasons. It's, you know, this is our land. We're going to be in charge. Who are these people telling us what to do reasons? At the same time, you've got to take your allies somewhere if you actually need to build coalitions to stop these death machines. But, you know, I mean, how deep we want to go, Joel, I think ultimately this doesn't stop until neoliberal capitalism is dismantled. I think that's actually what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and that like bipartisan, you know, two-party pendulum that is like by design a part of its
Yeah.
function.
You want to talk about, you know, consciousness raising moments like Gaza has been. This covering this last election, which I did a little bit, you know, as the mental health break from covering the genocide, basically, which is, I should just get a different job. That's not a mental health break. But like, it was so, none of the big existential issues, climate, growing wealth inequality, perpetual rolling genocides, none of that was on the ballot anywhere between the two major parties. You could not split a position. It was this giant blob of imperial Western bullshit. So I have never felt less like we had a functioning democracy during that than during that last election. Really. So when I need to sit and analyze, you know, what's happening within Parliament or whatever, it just kind of feels like WWE to me nowadays.
And especially because Labor seems so reluctant to even engage with the crossbench. It's never happening, and like more often than not, it's siding or looking to the coalition side of the House to get things done. And you know, when you see something so like revolting as what's happening right now, as far as in public sentiment and government messaging or policy, you can't help but sort of think that the bipartisan blob is kind of evolving a little bit. You know, I spoke to Greg Jericho about this, how, you know, essentially, you know, in the Anglosphere, in parliamentary democracies with just two parties kind of dominating, things start to sort of get a bit funny around this time when there's just like wars and like huge commotions involving like foreign imperial allies. It becomes very kind of like proto-authoritarian when you've got these two big parties agreeing with each other on all the things that count and kind of deferring on a couple of things like childcare and things like that, and throwing that in the mix. And I just, yeah, I wonder what you think the effect of this, you know, this very concentrated, whether it be in the press or in politics or anything here or in supermarkets, for fuck's sake, you know, there's this real concentration of a duopoly, a lack of choice. And, you know, potentially that kind of hurt us in that last election, people that were looking for something outside of that, because everything sort of loaded from one party to the other. And I think that majority didn't quite reflect the progressive needs of this country. So, yeah, what do you think about the duopoly and how it kind of sits over everything?
I mean, I think some of what we see with the political duopoly is almost identical to what we see with the supermarket duopoly and the airline duopoly and whatever. And that ultimately it's just a bunch of people colluding with each other to keep themselves in those positions and presenting a very limited spectrum of choice about what we're offered. And we get to vigorously debate within this limited spectrum of choice. You know, we get to argue like crazy about fucking franking credits or I don't know, what was it this last election? I've repressed that it was so uninspiring and insipid. What were we talking about a few months ago during the election cycle? Can you remember, Joel? Was it anything important? Anything big?
Oh, fucking nothing, man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is theater. We don't actually talk about, all right, no more emissions. All right, we're going to stop the oligarchs subverting our democracy. We're going to stop this fascist authoritarian push with all our universities and cops. No one ever says this stuff. We just get distracted with waffle. And, you know, I think if you're looking at a big picture stuff, this comes down to ultimately the establishment perpetually divides the working classes over and over again. And to a degree, my most cynical lens on it's kind of how I saw the last Australian election. It was just we'll get the red t-shirts fighting the blue t-shirts, but ultimately everyone is serving our interests.
It's with that election though. I mean, Peter Dutton's product was just so rubbish, and the repudiation of the Trump brand combined with that, like, sent so many seats over to Labor.
Too many, like in a
Yeah,
way that it's actually going to work against the masses, I think.
yeah, damaging to democracy. But once again, Labor's sitting there top heavy. There's going to be a resurgent, like, neo right movement that's really starts hammering home out of this. You can see that the coalition doesn't want to pull its head in and go back to Turnbull era, trying to appear something a little bit more reasonable to the Australian public. So they're looking at a new future, and in the meantime, Labor's like consolidating power everywhere it goes, and yeah, and I mean, like, I don't know if Albo's policies won him that election, right? I mean, that's the long and short of
God
it.
no, God no. I mean, you and I can barely remember any of his policies, and it's only been a couple of months. I it was a repudiation of how just awful Peter Dutton is, how unelectable a prospect that guy is, but also fear and misunderstanding of what Trump's doing in the States. It's that Australian mindset that this is just a Trump problem, not a establishment problem, which it clearly is. I mean, let's not forget, let's not memory hole that Joe Biden paid for most of this genocide. It was under 16 months of this was Democrats before Trump got in. You know, this is a bipartisan establishment depravity.
Totally.
And
Bernie
yeah,
Bernie Sanders was backing it up until a few months ago, and yeah, like, AOC just signed off missiles, defensive missiles the other week. So yeah, and the show goes on, and you say that Biden, had it for a large chunk. Well, Albo's had it for the whole chunk, and Penny
exactly.
Wong's had it for the whole chunk. And yeah, hearing that there's going to be a phone call teed up, instead of, like, maybe he shouldn't be facing Tel Aviv and he should be facing that big crowd there, and starting to think about why he's the last to the table in the OECD at the moment. To somebody recognizing Palestine, it's quite a tell to think that both of our political parties, the progressive option that we have right now, are like literally the last to, the first to cut UNRWA funding and the last to sanction Israel. It's yeah, maybe indicative of, like, the Barney that we're in Canberra, with Washington. We must be in a lot of shit with those guys up there. We must owe them a lot of favors in the political class. There can't be any explanation.
I mean, I'm sure Washington has alarming degrees of power over the situation that, again, no one in Australian media ever seems to want to talk about. You know, we had Peter Cronell on the Sunday Shot a couple of weeks ago now, and I was asking him about American military bases, and officially there's three, but actually there's between 30 and 40 of them. And if we wanted to get rid of them, I'm fairly certain we couldn't. And under almost any other scenario, if you can't get rid of a foreign military base, you usually call that an occupation. So there's definitely some untowards influence going on. It is depressing. I guess I don't just draw my hope from within the national boundaries, though. You know, if there is a pushback, it's a global pushback, and the Palestinian global justice movement is a global movement. We see this everywhere, and you know, the left, however you choose to define it, you know, this is Nasser Mashni said this when I was interviewing him, head of APAN, that, you know, look at the size of the global Palestinian movement every single week in Melbourne, every single week around the world, masses of people culminating in this giant march on the bridge. If not that as the groundswell for some form of resistance, what else?
Totally, like the longest continuous protests in Australia's history, I think, or is it
I think so.
Vietnam, up there with Vietnam anyway? And a buy-in now from the mainstream and from a broad cross section of the Australian community, as seen on the weekend. It seems like it's only a matter of time before Penny Wong and co have to make some kind of action here. Um, and with the recognition of Palestine, it's just actually honoring their conference party platform that they've been kicking down the road for a couple of years now. So yeah, it makes for an interesting period ahead. I even heard, what's his name? Is it Ruddick? Who's the libertarian candidate that was there? John Ruddick, I think it was, and he was on the he was on the radio with Ben Fordham, and I couldn't believe it. And like Ruddick was defending why he was there with a group of Palestinian Christians and Jews that were against the genocide, and Ben Fordham ended up kind of chiming in and saying, "Oh, actually, it's I thought they were going to be a bit more tactical, and then they've just been going in there and just bombing everything." Now, like, it seems like Ben Fordham's not part of that 14% either. I can't believe I was quoting, Libertarian and Ben Fordham there, but the thing, the point being exactly that, people are falling off this 14%. Potentially some of these people in the legacy media that aren't upstairs, that aren't part of this kind of Murdoch decree, have had enough. And I'm sure I've heard many journalists now are sick and tired of being limited or having one arm tied behind their back, or they're trying to, cover some of this stuff. So, yes.
Good, great, awesome. But like, a bunch of us been sticking our necks out for 2 years. So like, get fucking on with it, please.
Yeah. And I can't even get money for a heater. So, fuck those guys. They got their places in Sydney. It's time that they can write an article. And we could see the power of it. We saw in the 7:30 report with Gillian Siegel the other week just what a good mainstream coverage of something can do. Even that Matt Doran report in The Plane had a very profound effect about the baseline in Gaza. And there are a lot of people that need that kick in the ass from something from the legacy media. So we might leave it with the legacy media. Do you think the legacy media will be changing the way, we've seen the ABC start to shift its narrative? We've even seen in some of the commercial networks that they've been covering things a bit differently. Can you see the media being a key component in maybe pushing the government over this line? Or will they just continue to protect the narrative?
I mean, thus far, that is what they have been doing. They are, I mean, I can see there is unequivocally a shift happening, but it is the most conservative, baby-brained shift that's happening. It's within very acceptable structures. Let's talk about history briefly. When you think about the way histories have been written about the Vietnam War, they do allow a certain amount of criticism of American enterprise, but never really their intentions. You're allowed to say, oh, they meant well. They went in there for liberty and whatever, and a couple of million people got napalmed. That's how they tell that truth now. It's never going... They might allow a certain degree of this is horrific, this is genocidal even, this is war crimes. But the way that Bernie Sanders in particular tries to pin this all on Benjamin Netanyahu rather than acknowledging the reality that Israel is an inherently genocidal project and can't exist without committing genocide around it perpetually. So yes, they will acknowledge something. They will not go far enough. They will still silo context. in the way that mainstream media always does in the West. Everything's a little bit disconnected. Everything starts here and ends the next day, kind of thing. So, yes, there will be more pressure on politicians. I'm cynical. Like, we know what the plan is for Gaza. We've seen horrific AI videos of Trump hotels, basically built on the corpses of the Palestinians. I have no faith in Western establishment. The only thing that's going to stop it is if it collapses, basically. An Israeli society on the verge, America, not quite as close, but it's bubbling somewhere. Who can stop America? America can stop America, basically. People within.
In Australia, is there a way of being able to right this kind of wrong? The status quo, which is being held by the bipartisan class in Canberra.
I don't know. I don't know. I think about that constantly. I think about what the most effective use of my time and energy is. And I guess thus far I've decided it's, truth and counter narrative as well. But I mean, they have to respond. They have to acknowledge the fact that Australians really are fundamentally disgusted by what's happening. No one likes genocide. Populations need to be primed for it. You need to be lied to. You need to have context removed. You need to get the bloodlust rushing in people. It's not a natural state of affairs. And all of that stuff has fallen apart. The narrative's fallen apart. People don't believe it. So yes, something will eventually happen, but I think we need to think about the perpetuation of these cycles across history for the next time out and the next time out and the next time out. And that's why it's very important that whatever happens, it doesn't just stop at platitudes, that justice gets served. And I think there are a whole bunch of people on this planet that feel like they're going to pursue that with the rest of their lives. They've been so affected by this.
Totally. And with all eyes watching, it just feels that, when things slow down and the smoke settles a little bit, both in Israeli society, in Western societies, in Washington, there'll be a bit of a moment of clarity that might kick in there, where everyone realizes what the fuck has just happened, a little bit, because it does feel like that, as we're all kind of, just sitting there in abject horror going, what the fuck is going on with the Bombay doors and being responsible for what's happening right now? And why isn't our government doing something? And you often wonder what they're all doing up there, and how their moral calculus is so different.
I think John Lennon got it right,
us.
Man, that we're ruled by psychopaths with psychopathic aims that they keep hidden from us, and we can't understand it, but we do have an obligation to resist it.
But it's also incredible, like the personality types that rise into positions of power, over time, especially in times of like woe, in the ebbs and flows of like human existence. There has been, there has been worse times than others, right? So it's just interesting to see the kind of people, like a lot of them are incompetent too. Like they're psychos and completely fucking incompetent. So,
I just think that's inherent. I think we have designed our society to encourage that. I don't know if it was the intent, but it feels logically inherent that if you say you set up an economic system that literally encourages greed, celebrates narcissism, and promotes psychopathic traits because it gets things done in the business world or whatever, you do that, you are going to inherently end up with the most psychopathic, narcissistic, sociopathic people rising to the top of the chain because they fit this system that's been built for them. We go back to needing to dismantle fucking everything, really.
And in like the age of the individual hyper individualism, the self-help, fuck everyone else, I'm looking after my own kind of mentality, which pervades, my generation of millennials. It's freaking everywhere.
Attachment, live, laugh, love, pray, whatever the fuck. Don't think about it.
And that's like the missing link almost here. When sitting with this thing, people just can't do it. That they don't have that in their calculation. They're too focused, hyper focused on things, and but the starving children are starting to change that. That's another podcast altogether, Dave. Like speaking about how. How all these kind of like bells and whistles of neoliberalism have made us numb to these kind of things, and detached from things that are going to come for us one day. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
It is. And I worry about this stuff all the time. AI is yet another avenue that's going to further encourage detachment from each other, but also from our own thinking processes.
Now, while I got you, I want to ask you, what's going on with the shot, and your writing, and what's in store for the time ahead for you.
Yeah, cheers, man. We started the Sunday shot during the election, so I have to get out of bed at 9 a.m. on a Sunday, which isn't ideal for my personality type, but it's been fun. I've been able to have really interesting conversations with cool people. So we're going to keep going with that indefinitely, I suppose, as long as we can afford it, basically. I have a larger project going on in the background, which I'm not ready to talk about yet, but I will be doing something else as well. There's this kind Going back to what we were talking about earlier, there is a madness that comes with checking in every week on the depravity and responding to it on a weekly or fortnightly basis. It's crazy making. Um, so I'm going to keep doing that, even though it is crazy. I'm willingly walking back into this, but yeah, I will do other things as well. I think just to have a different rhythm going, like a larger creative project to stick my teeth into. I'm speaking in very broad, general terms, but yeah, I guess we just keep going. We keep going until they shut us up, right?
Yeah, well, Gillian Siegel nearly had a crack the other week, so we'll see. We'll see
She'll
how
be
that.
back.
That's right. She'll be back. It's an interesting one, being on the periphery of it, as you know, and it feels like you're beating your head up against the wall sometimes. But there has been a marked shift, I think, in recent times. A lot of people I just speak to every day are starting to talk about this disconnect, and there is a lot of like distrust just towards the government in society these days. And I think a lot of that's been over the last few years, from the pandemic till now. And they've let a few things slip at our expense. And yeah, I'm just hoping personally that there's going to be a new period of like engagement in Australian society, around things like AUKUS, our sovereignty, the way we sort of, approach the region and things like that. We can only hope, or else, yeah, we might just keep falling into some kind of, yeah, neoliberal nightmare.
I
Either
love
or.
your optimism, dude. I really do. No, I appreciate it because I'm not full of it at the moment. I'm paying a lot of attention to the push against protest in the UK at the moment, the prescribing Palestine Action as a terrorist group. I find that sort of stuff terrifying, really, when you think about what's actually going on there. And that is unequivocally the push that the Zionists and Julian Segal have here. If we manage to not go that way, it will be, it will be a remarkable effort on the part of the people, basically, because that authoritarian push is unequivocally here. And if we're just looking out for it in like deep Peter Dutton shaped shadows, then we're looking in the wrong places as well. It's
But between that Seppo, what's her name, the American e-safety commissioner, and and yeah, Seagal, like we're kind of getting wedged. One's a South African apartheid white settler, and the other one's like a tech baron that's going to be, policing us. But I mean, one thing I'm trying to work out here is, as these Zionist narratives, which have huge influence over decision making in the West, as they're collapsing in the perception of the humanity. Um, Anything that's kind of built on propping that up at all expenses of everything else is destined to fail. And if they're going to start locking people away for protesting against a genocide. It comes at the expense of potentially a public awakening, and maybe that war of independence that we've never had in this country. Maybe we're in
not
pre-revolutionary
to aim,
times.
man. We took the aim on.
Well, yes, we did, and we lost that battle. So maybe we can reload and yeah, form up, and yeah, we're in pre-revolutionary times, perhaps. So let's hope the government can kind of turn things around and start listening to this groundswell.
I think it needs to. I mean, across the democratic world, and I lose the phrase loosely nowadays, we are seeing the actions of the government further and further severed from the will of the people. And I mean, really, that's what journalists should be focusing on right now. That is the entire point of the profession. And I'm staggered how much fucking mushroom lady content we're churning out while we're denying genocides, you know?
The Mushroom Lady content was thick and forever. It was fucking incredible how much they put that mushroom coverage together. And yeah, if they can get, what's his name, that if they can get Matt Bevan or something like that, maybe to do something about how many kids have died in Gaza instead of like some, another thing on Russia or Ukraine or something like that, it might help. But look, while I've got you, I want to talk about one more thing. Uh, how do you think, with the genocide and the support that we're being asked to give towards certain narratives, how do you think they clash with, the 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 movies, the video games, the cultural, the pop cultural icons and references in our society? I heard about that new Superman movie, which I haven't seen yet, which is essentially just like kicking the shit out of out of Israel. We're seeing things like Andor and things like that, which are capturing revolutionary zeal and pointing out the horrors of doing things against oppressed people. So how do you feel like culture, and those narratives that everyone loves watching in the cinema are sort of clashing with empire realities, as the emperor's like doing the counter opposite and expecting us to support him?
I mean, it's a great question. I would say that that is always the case. Like, this type of art always clashes with imperial narratives. It's just really fucking obvious now to a degree that it usually isn't. I
Mm.
thought Andor was really interesting in a sense. It felt less metaphorical than Star Wars usually felt. It was a little bit more, oh, here's a play-by-play of how to fight the tyrant that's taking over our democracy a little bit. It was a little bit more direct about things. And it was also, again, it said genocide before our prime minister did. Like, Star Wars beat the prime minister to calling this all genocide, at least through the veil of metaphor. Art is crucial. It is part of how we form our political awakening. It's how we understand the human condition. The cynical part of me is certain that this is why AI slop is starting to flood the zone, so we get less radical resistance art. Yes, the Nikes I bought woke me up, but so did John Lennon and Rage Against the Machine and Star Wars. These are stories that resonate because they're true, because they talk to something innate about being human, about justice, about who we are as a collective. They will try to make them go away, but they won't. So, yeah, I find a lot of comfort. I find a lot of understanding in those sorts of stories. And when you have the people that are meant to be telling the truth on the news every day lying to your faces, you do get more truth in things like Star Wars. It does explain a truer shape about how empire works, about how capitalism works, than you get from fucking David Spears.
So yeah, potentially in the West, I mean, we saw all the controversy about that jeans ad, and they're saying woke is dead, and they're changing that they're getting they're pumping out media that seems to be getting people ready to fight a war in Iran or some shit. You know what I mean? It's all like, yeah, let's drive around in like big trucks and wear jeans and shit. You go shooting, and like America's back, right? And it's quite impressive to see this massive like propaganda beast like turning on a pivot and turning into this kind of like, yeah, this like back into Clint Eastwood again kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's going back into that 80s Reagan period of which we grew up watching all those great Arnie movies in.
Mhm.
um but
The
yeah, it's
bad guys are Arabs again. Like, for a little while they were Nazis, and then they were Russians, and then they're Arabs. Whatever the empire needs in this particular moment. We've always been at war with whoever the fuck we're pretending we've always been at war with. That I've been thinking about the Hurt Locker a little bit, if we're talking about political awakenings, because there was a CNN story about an IDF soldier that had bulldozed so many captive people that he couldn't eat meat anymore, and it was presented as a sob story, and it was the same. We're going to go to the Middle East, we're going to murder a bunch of people, but then we're going to come back and have PTSD, and we're going to make this movie that makes that position feel really sympathetic. You know, this guy that sniped too many people in the Middle East and became addicted to the rush and, you know, fucked himself up. The whole premise of that film is feel sorry for the people that are suffering for this atrocity we are perpetually committing over in the Middle East because we want to keep stealing their oil. Like, that is actually the purpose of that movie.
Interesting what the next batch of movies are in store, because yeah, I'm sure that they'll be angled towards some kind of conquest or new way of doing things. So yeah, but look, thanks for coming on, Dave, and I really appreciate you joining us. I hope your writing continues in this space because it's been really important. And yeah, cheers.
Thanks, bro. And yeah, great work setting up the show. Good stuff, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope to have you on again soon, and we could shoot the breeze.
Absolutely, mate. Thank you.